And we are back on INFOWARS Nightly News on this August 14th, 2012 Tuesday edition. I want to thank Paul Joseph Watson for doing the news portion of the transmission this evening. Now, the information we're about to cover is of the greatest import. And finally, people are starting to listen and pay more attention. Dr. Webster Tarpley is going to join us here in a moment. We're getting him on the line. But first, let me just show you some headlines here. Exclusive, U.S. banks told to make plans for preventing collapse. And this is out of Reuters and the Chicago Tribune, carrying a Reuters story. Der Spiegel, investors prepare for Euro collapse. That's one of the most prestigious publications in Europe, not just Germany. Undoubtedly the most prestigious in Germany. So when you see it there, the writing is on the wall big time. Chinese companies pull out of U.S. stock markets. Incredible headline. Associated Press today. Detroit News, Treasury, U.S. to lose $25 billion on auto bailout to General Motors, who they paid to move to China and Brazil. Incredible treachery. Obama now shutting down, as promised, 1/3 of U.S. coal power plants. I mean, rolling blackouts, massive power increases. A foreign army couldn't do this. But you got to break things down to loot it. Maybe he's been learning from Mitt Romney, Obama has. Summer of gloom for crisis hit Rome shops. This is just some of the news that we have here. Now, who broke it down? If you go back to 3.5 years ago, one of our main experts in the Obama deception, and then 6 months after that, Fall of the Republic, because we tried to warn people then, these two preeminent films that, by the way, are free online at YouTube. They're trying to take them down right now. We've fought fake strikes and things to get them back up. But the other days, I think more and more, knock on wood, are limited. You can get it right now, by the way, I should add, at InfoWarsShop.com for $5. We lose money on that price when you count what it went into this film. Get it, show it to people, because it isn't really about Obama. It's about the global banking oligarchy imploding the world economy to consolidate it, but getting so out of hand in their greed that they've even lost control, many economists and experts believe. Dr. Tarpley is a doctor of history, but also he is an economist. We're going to be speaking to him in a moment about this, because I totally agree with his analysis on the problem. We debate sometimes on the solution, because big government solutions almost always get taken over and used by oligarchs, by the crony, monopoly men inside. But before we get to all that, he certainly knows how to forecast and gauge what's happening with a stunning accuracy. So we've got him for a full 60 minutes, starting when I go to him, to break down the current state of the world economically, war, how that ties in. He's been to Libya, been to Syria. The admission now that Al-Qaeda, the CFR last week praised Al-Qaeda and said, quote, we need them. They're heroes. We need them. They're so good. But I thought the TSA had to go in my pants to find bin Laden. But now they say, no. Domestic groups, they're the terrorists. So we're going to be going over all of this, because the world is getting more and more insane. And now when you start hearing them talk about imminent collapse of the euro and then the dollar and J.P. Morgan and all of this, to give us the real state of the world financial system, to give us a real breakdown on it, Webster Tarpley joins us. And then in the second half of the interview, after he gives us the geopolitical current breakdown, I'm going to sit back and try to ask very few questions and give him the floor in the second half to roll through his ideas for a solution. Now, some of you who are more constitutional or libertarian, you know, you're not going to like kind of the FDR-style ideas, but I've promised to just put these ideas out there, because Tarpley, who I respect when it comes to his analysis, thinks this is the only solution. That does not mean I'm endorsing it, but I'm not scared to hear other ideas. And then at the end of the interview, I'll write a few notes, and I'll have some counterpoints to what Webster is saying. But undoubtedly, the Republican leadership doesn't tell you about the majority of where the money's going, and that's to corporate welfare and inside crony scams. They want to point all day at the welfare crowd when they've already shipped their jobs overseas. So Tarpley's right on that front, and he predicted much of what unfolded with Rand Paul a few weeks before it did unfold, and was proven right on that front to a great extent. So he joins us now from right outside D.C. in Maryland. Dr. Tarpley, great to have you here. Thank you. Let the 60 Minutes begin. Give us your forecast, your breakdown, the waterfront of what's happening in the world today, and the fact that now, headline after headline, Chinese pulling money out of the stock market, global implosion, banks told get ready for implosion. What's happening?
Well, the starting point is the big reality is a world economic depression. It's a world economic depression similar to that of the 1930s, but in many ways worse than what we had in the 1930s. We've been in a depressed world economy in that sense since 2008 at the very latest, right? September 2008, the Lehman Brothers weekend around September 15th. This had been signaled by the bankruptcy of Bear Stearns back in the springtime in March. But then by the time we got to September, it's clear that every bank in Wall Street, and we saw them all, right? We saw AIG, we saw Merrill Lynch, we saw every bank essentially bailed out, given Treasury money through the TARP, but then given even more in 0% Federal Reserve loans, and that included foreign banks, right up to the tune of 25 or 27 trillion dollars. And since then, we've had various initiatives going on, mainly that if you're a zombie bank or a hedge fund hyena, you can go to the Federal Reserve and you can borrow at 0% interest rates in the United States, or 1%. Similarly, if you're a zombie bank in Europe, you can go to the European Central Bank and get money for 1%. But the problem with this is this has not produced a recovery, because all of that credit is being absorbed by this mass, this cancerous growth of about $2 quadrillion. That is to say, 2,000 trillion dollars of bankrupt, kited derivatives that are clogging the banking system. And this means credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, structured investment vehicles, all sorts of combinations of those. So you're in a depression now. Not every area of the world was immediately dragged into the depression. The depression actually started more or less simultaneously in the United States and Great Britain. On the British side, you remember Northern Rock, a very big bank, blew up in October of 2007 already, and followed then by Royal Bank of Scotland, which at the time was the biggest bank in the world. So these have all blown up. And now in the meantime, we've also seen the corruption, right? LIBOR, the LIBOR fixing scandal, which goes back to 07-08, but continues probably up to the present day. That is about 16 of the very biggest banks in the world. It essentially shows that you're dealing with a cartel. You're dealing with a world banking cartel of 16 or thereabouts large zombie banks. I say zombie banks because they're all bankrupt and they're all kept going using government resources. But the problem is they don't have any positive social function anymore. They don't issue loans for commercial banking purposes. They don't do anything for plant, equipment, business investments, capital formation, and so forth. What they do is speculate. They drive up the price of gasoline. They drive up the price of food commodities and similar things. They rip off their own customers with fees, and they foreclose on real estate and loot the population that way. So we're in the middle of this. Now, if you look at the responses of the ruling class, I think it's pretty clear there's a growing consensus in the world ruling class. I mean, the kind of people who come together at Bilderberg, or the people who control the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve and things like this, and the political parties, needless to say. Obama is a creature of Wall Street. He's a Wall Street puppet. And then we have the new combination, the Romney-Ryan combination, which they intend to carry forward the Wall Street program with, I think, even greater criminal energy, even greater aggressiveness, right? Because they want to show that they're new and they're full of fight, right? And they want to flay the U.S. population alive. The consensus that I can see is austerity, and austerity means cuts. It means a psychosis that when you're in a depression, You've got to cut budgets. You've got to destroy the social safety net. You've got to strip people of their economic rights. And this you can see in Europe, right? You look at the conditions that were dictated to Greece, but also Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy is now coming, Greece also. All of this amounts to essentially posing the question, we have a depression, who should pay for the depression? This is the only real political question that we have. And the answer from the ruling class is working people pay for the depression. The middle class pays for the depression, the upper middle class even, poor people, working class people, that's who pays for the depression. And I would say that answer means genocide. If you
Sure. Let me just now interject a point, because you've made so many. They phrase it in the right-wing, left-wing debate, though, that if you say don't make the poor or the middle class pay, oh, you want rich people to have higher taxes to pay for your free welfare. That's not what's happening. In the Obama deception, you go over the first banker bailout numbers, and this was even in mainstream news, but back of the paper, where you'd have over 90% of it was corporate welfare and bailouts to the ultra-rich. But somehow since then they've spun it, even though in Europe it's mainly their fake debts that they got government to sign on to, too big to fail, to where, oh, it's those lazy French or those lazy Germans or those lazy Greeks when they're working very hard over there. Sure, they may get a week more of vacation than us. We get 2-3 weeks, they get 4. But the point is that it's incredible for somebody like myself who pays some attention to economics and what's really going on, that they've done such a good job of scapegoating people. But as you point out, when they get the austerity in Greece or Argentina or wherever they've done it in the last 15 years, it implodes the tax revenue. So the bankers, that's why I say it's on purpose. Right. They know that when they raise taxes on the poor or cut benefits or the middle class, that it actually drives down tax receipts. So why do they want to drive things into oblivion? I mean, right there, Max Kaiser ran into Steve Forbes in Greece a few months ago during a bunch of rioting, and he was there at a conference bragging, oh, things are imploding, we're buying everything up cheap. So, I mean, doesn't that show they know what they're doing?
No, I don't think it does. I think that's sort of a commentary on the backside of accomplished fact, right? That's the wisdom that comes after the fait accompli.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah. The problem that you have is when you have a speculative-minded group of finance capitalists, right? You have financiers who fundamentally are not interested in industry or agriculture, right? They're not even at the level of Andrew Carnegie or Henry Ford, right? They're at the level of ripoff, right? They want short-term paper profits, and they figure that speculation, which in our time means, of course, derivatives, these, again, the collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, and all the rest of this. They think that that actually represents wealth. Because
sure, they want post-industrial world, and they say they do. In fact, it's not that they're not at the level of Henry Ford or Carnegie with steel and Coke. They know what they're doing. They're at odds against production. Henry Ford wanted to pay the workers well so they could buy his car. He wanted an economy. They want the post-industrial. Why is that?
Well, again, let's not be too nice to Henry Ford. He financed Hitler, did a lot of very bad things.
Oh, no, but I wasn't praising him on the Hitler thing, Tarpley.
Sure.
I was stating that he understood you've got to have a market.
At least sometimes he did, right? And I think, unfortunately, as he went along, he understood it less and less. But the idea is the power of an industrialist faction. You don't really see this in the U.S. You see it in China. You might even see it in Japan. In Russia, you see a lot of people who are industrialists, even if it's extractive industries, but not here. The Anglo-Americans have built their house on speculative paper, and that means derivatives. Now, the problem that they have is they live for the next bubble. We saw it with Greenspan, right? Bubbles Greenspan. He went from the irrational exuberance of the wealth effect, the housing bubble. Then we had the Latin American loan bubble before that. Then we had the dot-com bubble. Then we went back to the housing bubble. They feel that they can't make their system work without a series of bubbles. And once they see a bubble, it's like a heroin addict. I don't think there's any element of calculation. This is a very important point, because what I'm saying is that this ruling class is a highly political question. This ruling class